Welcome, everyone. You are listening to Sanctuary's Coffee and Conversation Show. My name is Myrna Haskell. I'm executive editor of Sanctuary Magazine. This is an online publication for women that empowers and inspires with a focus on the arts, humanitarian pursuits, health and wellness, inspirational travel, career, and finance. You can find us at sanctuary-magazine.com. This morning, my guest is Stephanie Raffelock. She is a former iHeartRadio host, an award-winning author, and a very popular podcast guest. Good morning, Stephanie. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So I think probably some of our listeners will recognize your name because we had an excerpt of your most recent book, Creatrix Rising, in our November 2021 issue. That was for our Aging Gracefully issue. And listeners who aren't familiar with that, you can find that from our book excerpts section if you'd like to take a look at Stephanie's book. But today we're going to talk about the topic, combating stereotypes that are often applied to aging women. And so, Stephanie, I wanted to start out the conversation by talking about, and you know, I feel this way too, the fact that perhaps these types of stereotypes are applied more to women than men, and what your thoughts are on that.
Well, they are applied more to women than men. And when you think about it, that's thousands and thousands and thousands of years of archetypal conditioning. Women, to a large degree, up until modern times, have been defined by men, and their roles have been defined by men. So it stands to reason then that the stereotyping of women would also come from men. And we are in a time, an interesting historical time for women, where we are claiming our voice and we are beginning to define ourselves.
That's right. You know, because you know what came to mind for me is the idea that the elder gentleman is just that. He's wise, he's an elder gentleman, you know, and the woman's an old hag, right?
Right. Well,
I mean, it's terrible.
Yep.
So, so do you think that this is part of the reason that perhaps some women feel like they want to go back to their younger days? Maybe they yearn to be their younger selves, be back in their 20s and 30s. What's that all about?
Well, I think that there's a few things going on there. Advertising, and we live in an advertising world, has not made a seat at the table for older women. So the average age range for companies, clothing companies, makeup companies, whatnot, there's a 45-year-old cutoff. We're going to market from 20-year-olds to 45-year-olds. So when you don't see images of yourself, you begin to question that it's because of the way you look, the way you present in the world. And this whole thing of the way we look, the idea that we should be tight-skinned, that we should be smooth, that we should be airbrushed, you know, from this point forward, is a really dangerous one, because we're very careful now in these new generations not to give that message to our daughters, but we give it to ourselves. We don't give that message to grandmothers, the message of your beauty is only skin deep. I mean, that's what I used to hear when I was growing up. My mom would say, just remember, beauty is only skin deep. Mm-hmm. But, you know, what she meant is that there is a deeper beauty in one. And I can't imagine any of the women that I know going to their older moms and saying, geez, you know, I loved you more when you were younger and smooth skinned. I mean, we just wouldn't dream of saying it. And yet we'll walk by a mirror and go, God, I used to look so good when I was young and I just look like crap now. The way we talk to ourselves, that's a narrative that has to change first in order to change the narrative in the culture. So advertising holds a lot of accountability, but we have a personal accountability. There is a call coming from inside the house, and it says we have to learn to love ourselves in this new beauty, in this third act, because it's different than the beauty of the 20, 30, and 40-year-old.
But it's still beautiful.
It is still beautiful. It is a different kind of beauty.
And, you know, I heard you mention young women, and I think that we, you know, middle-aged women that have, you know, my daughter just turned 26. We understand that that's been a problem, and I think we do talk to them differently. But then there's this whole social media, you know, the technology has brought visual images to the point where everything is way exacerbated in terms of these visual young images, models, and all of that due to social media and technology, right? So we're sort of fighting that, even though we understand that we need to raise our young women to know that they should be valued by their goals and their intelligence and their love for others and what they do for their community, right? And not based on what their skin deep stuff. But then we're fighting with all of this social media and imagery that they see constantly online and on their phones.
Right. I don't know what to even say about that or where to begin. I will say that what gives me a little bit of hope on social media is if you notice on Facebook and on Instagram, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of groups of women that are going gray naturally and celebrating the gray, celebrating the silver in their hair. And so I love that part of things, but it's, the images, you know, are one thing. And the other part of that is the way that we judge the images that we see. Oh, this one is good because it's airbrushed and this one is bad because it's not. And so I think that we have to educate ourselves as women, and support.
I know, and just that women feel that they have to put on an airbrushed image. You know,
Right.
why not show? I mean, it's more natural. I think that even some women go so far as they have so much work done to try to get back, as you mentioned, that tight skin look and that younger look, that it starts distorting
Yes.
what they normally would have looked like. That's beautiful for middle age, or there's some beautiful women who are elderly. I have to tell you, Stephanie, I don't know if you saw it in this month's issue, but Carol Lipper Gray, one of our co-associate editors, interviewed the founder of Celebrate the Gray, which is actually a modeling agency out in California.
I know, I'm
And
with
they're
them.
also, just as you mentioned, through social media and some of these other groups, they're trying to get the images of women who are gray-haired in middle age in the beginning of their elderly years out there, and to show them as beautiful figures for us and people to look up to. And you know, I hope that some of that is going to change this messaging and this idea out there, because it's so visual for the young people right now because of technology. You know, it's such a visual thing to constantly be battered with thousands of images that tells you, doesn't this look great?
Right.
So,
Stephanie
you
Odell,
know,
by the way, has done a fabulous job with Celebrate the Gray. And I signed with her about a year ago.
oh, I didn't know that.
Yes.
Oh my
So
goodness. Well, that's
I'm
great.
well
See?
aware of the work that she does. Yeah.
Did you get a chance to read the interview by any chance?
Not yet, but now I'm
Yeah,
headed for
it's right
it.
available from the front page. So that's, yeah, that would be great if you could read that, because I know that our readers responded really, really well to it. We've had some mentions about that in previous issues, but this one really dug in. So, and I love what she's doing. And I love the fact that they're actually signing with some major companies, and it's working. I
Yeah,
mean, their models are getting work. And I think if we see more of that, the general public will relax and get on board more with it,
I
right?
agree with that. I agree with that. When we see the images coming back with us, we know we have a place at the table.
Right. Now, I want to dig in a little bit to this aging gracefully and really the meaning behind it. And we do have, as I mentioned before, the November issue, which is a special issue for us, Aging Gracefully. And we have a lot of that content is it's driven by health and wellness. But I think I'm thinking about overall aging gracefully. So not just health and wellness, but continuing to reach goals, how you feel about yourself inside, continuing to socialize and dress up and feel good about going out and being in public. So all of that, you know, health, wellness. Talk a little bit to our community about what it says to you to age gracefully, and how you think women can help themselves to do that.
Well, I think there are different stages to aging gracefully. I mean, certainly middle age is different than where I am. I turned 70 in 2 weeks. And so my life is slowing down a little bit, not in terms of what's in my heart. It's interesting. My heart feels the same as it did when I was a 21-year-old
Me
woman,
too.
you know,
Yes.
but aging gracefully has become for me now a contemplative way of life, a reflective way of life. There's a reason that nature slows us down, and there's also a reason that nature keeps us alive. past middle age. So what is that? And I think that it is a time in our life when we reflect on all of the unanswered, the unresolved, the unredeemed issues in our life. Age has a way of wicking that out of us. And now I can sit back for the first time and I can really see the arc of this remarkable life and all the places that I weathered and battled the storm and came out stronger because of it. Often when we're in our 20s, 30s, 40s, you battle a storm and you think, I must have screwed up. I must have really made a horrible mistake in doing this. And of course, that's not really the case. But I didn't see that until I got a little bit older, that all of those events in life that seemed terribly unfair or betraying or disappointing and whatnot, that's the grit that makes us stronger. That's the grit that allows us to age gracefully. Because then when we stand back and we see this arc of our life, it's like looking at a 3-act play. You know, where does transformation happen in the play? It always happens in the last act. It happens in the 3rd act.
That's right. I love that step.
Yeah.
Yes.
So from midlife onward, we are in that 3rd act, and it is a remarkable and noble passage. And that's aging gracefully.
Yeah, I love how you put that. And, you know, I want to dig in a little bit to women, though, and the fact that, you know, we're caregivers. We speak to so many women, not just on this program, but who write to us, our readers, you know, about different articles we've had in the magazine. A lot of women put themselves last, that there's that whole bit where they're taking care of everybody else and they're forgetting about their own wellness and mindfulness and all of that. And so is a little piece of this aging gracefully have to do with, we need to refocus on what's making us feel good and what's making us excited about wherever we are with our number, our age. And because we do that, we can actually care for others better anyway. How do you feel about that piece to it?
It's kind of like the thing on the airplane, you know, if the masks drop, you put your own mask on first, and then you put the person next to you, the kid next to you, their mask on. So I think a lot of it is, yes, we have to accept ourselves the way we are. We have to give ourselves some self-care. And self-care means things like having a goal, having a dream, realizing that you aren't washed up, that, you know, you're going to grow psychologically, spiritually, till the day you die. So a lot of it is that. And boy, I lost my train of thought there for a second about, say the question to me again.
Well, I know that for women, not all the time, so I guess this is another little bit of a stereotype, but I think because we're multitaskers and because we're caregivers and moms and we're always worried about everybody else, right?
Yes.
So that's where we were bouncing off of that.
So the other part of that is, I think we need to accept the goddesses that we really are. And I don't really say that tongue in cheek. I mean, before the Age of Enlightenment, there were tons of goddesses in the forest. The realm of the green world, the earth, was women's. That was the temple of the goddess. And so I think we have to see ourselves in that way. There is a nobility to being a woman. There is a nobility to caregiving that a woman even knows how to be a caregiver. And in death, when men pass, they don't call out for their doctors. They don't call out for their brothers. They call out for their mother. And it's not just their mother, but the mother. And there is this goddess aspect to that I think it's good to embrace and say, not only do I have a power, I have a nobility, I have a dignity in this world, that I even know how to be a caregiver. And I'm going to start from there. And yes, I will take care of myself, but I'm going to remember being a goddess.
Oh, I love the goddess piece. And I think that sort of folds into this idea, and I think I may have seen this on your website, Stephanie, but this idea that it's actually a privilege to grow older into midlife, into our midlife years, into our elder years. And so let's just talk a little bit about that, because I think if we, as you mentioned just before, if women start thinking of themselves in that way as a goddess, the fact that it's a privilege that I have all these decades of knowledge and wonderful things and experiences that we have behind us now, right? So can you talk a little bit about that, the privilege to grow older?
Well, I mean, first of all, just the accumulating years in and of themselves
Yes.
are great because, you know, I'm still here and I'm living a life that I love. So that's part of it. I think the other part of it is when you get to the head of the line, so to speak, like, you know, your next stop is the horizon where eternity lingers. You hold a light for the women that stand behind you. And that's an incredible honor to be the woman that I paved a way, I paid a price, I hold the light. And at a certain point, I will turn and pass that light to the women who stand behind me. That's an incredible privilege.
It
That's
is.
part of the cycle of life, the cycle of humankind, that we're allowed to do that, that we're allowed to be that. And I think this is a great time for women to hold that light. We have found our voices, we have arrived, and the world is changing because of it.
And it is, and you know, part of what we celebrate in Sanctuary are the first woman to be on the courts, the first woman. We currently in the magazine have an interview with a British explorer who's the first woman to lead an all-women team to the polls, you know. So we celebrate this, and I think, you know, hundreds of years ago, young women didn't have the mentors and the women to look up to that they do now. I mean, you know, the trailblazers, those women, all those firsts and those, the suffragists and all of that, you know, I think that really helps young women to see someone who looks like them and the fact that they can do what this person who came before them did. And so a lot of it then, Stephanie, is that sort of recognition of what we've given back to the world and the community and how that's helping others. So I think I'm hearing that that's part of it, because I know we wanted to get a little bit out of the realm of specific health and wellness, but these other issues that can uplift and make somebody feel good about their age.
Yes. And I think one of the ways that we do that is to find some creative outlet that expresses the experience that we're going through. You know, as you get older, it's an experience to grow older. It's just as big as an experience of being 21 and trying to figure out who you are. Being 70 and trying to figure out who you are is an experience too. Give voice to it. How do you give voice to it? You do it through music, you do it through art, you do it through journaling, you do it through any kind of platform that allows you to create and express. And I think that that contributes to our overall mental health.
I do too. I do too. And it's, you know, the keeping our cognitive health and our physical health is directly linked to mindfulness and how we feel spiritually and emotionally too, right? So it's that whole person again, I think that we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So any final thoughts on that piece? Because I do want you to give you a little time to talk about you and your career and your what you can talk to. If anybody who has a podcast is listening, we'll get to that. But any final thoughts on this aging gracefully? Because I think that you know, our sweet spot demographic is women 45 to 65. Of course, we have readers of all ages, and we also have men. We have readers from the US and internationally as well, but that's kind of like our sweet spot. And so a lot of the women who are listening right now are hearing us and going, oh yes, I thought of that, or I thought I could do this, but I'm afraid, or I'm not sure if I can move on. And then the idea too about this age group, their children, if they had children, are now grown and more independent. And shouldn't that be the time that we spread our wings and we try something new? And so I was just wondering if you had any final thoughts.
Well, it is time to become the goddess. Uh, I encourage women to tell their stories. There's tremendous power in your story. Start with your personal feminist history. Sometimes we think that feminism is something that happens out there. You know, it happened with the suffragettes, it happened with Betty Friedan, it happened with Gloria Steinem. But really, feminism is something that happens within ourselves. It took a million little steps from a million women to make the kind of change in this culture that we have. And so if you go back into your ancestry, everybody has a story about that grandmother or that great grandmother who was maybe the first woman in her family to wear pants because she said,
Right?
I can't
Even
wear
little things like that.
even little
Absolutely.
things like that. I have a dear friend who told me that her parents ran a convenience store. And one day she came to work in a pair of pants and her husband said, you can't wear those. And she said, if I'm going to work in this gas station and convenience store, you bet I'm going to wear these. And it was like, it was a family issue. But just that act of rebellion moved the women in her family forward. I had a grandmother that was the first school superintendent in the state of Missouri, woman superintendent in the state of Missouri. And I think of what that must have been like for her at a time when women barely went to college in those days, let
I
alone to
know.
become, a school superintendent for the state of Missouri. So to know your feminist history and to write it down, and also to do the exercise when you read about your ancestors, what little you know about them, to just close your eyes and tune in and say, thank you. Because it's their push that got us to where we are now, just as it will be my push to get us to the next place, to where I turn around and pass the light to the woman behind me.
Yes. I love that. Thank you for that. So
Yes.
you're a very popular guest on podcasts, and I know that you speak on a lot of different issues. I know this is one area of expertise for you, but you want to tell our listeners a little bit more about what you do and where your expertise lies?
Well, I feel a purpose to uplift the women around me and to support women. There was a time, especially in my generation, where women were very competitive with each other. And I sometimes hear from women that's still true in the workplace. But what really works best is not for us to become like men in order to work and take on that warrior mentality, but to take on a mentality of the creatrix, which is what my last book was about. And creatrix was one of the Greek fates. There was the spinner, the weaver, and the cutter, and the weaver was the creatrix. And the word means a woman who makes things. And it's the archetypal word that I love for women of middle age and beyond, to replace the word crone. So I talk a lot about that when I do public speaking. I talk about creating your own personal feminist history, knowing what that is. I talk about embracing the new archetype of the creatrix, and to look at the mythology of the stories of your life. Women are in a process right now of rewriting those origin myths. I'm going to give you the two big origin myths, Pandora and Eve. They really parallel each other. And in those stories, they were both forbidden to do something.
Right.
And what happened was both those women were curious. So the message was, it's not good to be curious. And their curiosity, their want for self-knowledge, was their fall from grace. Well, I think it should be the opposite. I think that wanting self-knowledge should be the celebration of life.
Absolutely.
So we are rewriting those myths in our own personal stories now, which is, once again, I will hammer at it, one of the reasons I encourage women to keep a journal. Write your stories down, their legacy for your kids, or even if they're just for you, as a means of figuring things out. But write them down and know that we are in the process of rewriting these origin stories that have dictated who we are for so very, very long.
I agree with you. I think that journal writing, and even if it's part of the journal is sketching, too, it can be more,
Yes.
visual art related, but it's just very introspective. And a lot of women get their best ideas because they're physically writing or drawing. So it's
Right.
just such a good exercise, right? It's relaxing.
It's
There's all
very
this new art
meditative.
therapy out with that too, as well. Just doodling as a therapy. We're going to have a piece in the magazine about that next month. So I totally agree with you, Stephanie, that, because if you're not doing a daily exercise, which is reminding yourself about who you are, where you want to go, where you are now, it's more haphazard, right? It's one day you might be feeling a little bit of inspiration, maybe you're not the next day, but when you're actually going through an exercise, thanking yourself, thinking about your dreams, writing down what happened to you that day so that you could think through, why did that happen, what's good, what's bad about it. That is such a great exercise, I think, for anyone.
Yeah,
So
it's a
I'm glad you
meditative
brought that up.
exercise. Yeah, good.
And I am one of those women who I'm so busy with the magazine and these other things that I'm writing about other people that I do not do it all the time. And I really should. And now that I'm talking to you today, I'm going to get back to it because I kept a journal for years and years and years. And because I'm writing all of the time, I started like putting aside my personal writing, you know, and that's not a good thing. I totally agree with you that that's a really good exercise for women because we celebrate ourselves when we do that. It's about
Absolutely.
us.
Absolutely. And there's lots of books out there to help you if you know, don't know where to start or how to start. Natalie Goldberg, Writing Down the Bones, is one of the more famous ones. Christina Baldwin has a great book. There are lots of places where you can get the writing prompts and things that you need to start and prime the pump, so to speak.
Yes. Well, that sounds great. Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for joining me today. I do hope that you'll come back and join us again on another topic. This has been extremely interesting, and I really appreciate your expertise. And I know that our audience is going to be really interested in this topic. So we will have at the end, is there any contact information you'd like to include? Because we will have your website at the end of this show, but do you want listeners to just go to your website, or is there contact information?
Just go to my website.
Okay.
There's a contact form on there. There's all different ways to reach me, and I always reach back.
Okay, that sounds wonderful. Well, it's been such a joy to talk to you today, and thank you so much for joining me. I'd like to end by wishing all of our listeners and our readers good health, happiness, and continued inspiration. Thank you so much for joining us today.